After an accident that left him paralyzed, a millionaire lives in isolation under the care of the woman who is also his fiancée. But the only one who sees something wrong is a poor, quiet girl, the housekeeper's daughter. She discovers that the caregiver not only controls every aspect of the man's routine, but also plans to kill him to inherit his fortune. What this child does next sets off a twist so unexpected that it may save a life and expose a carefully hidden crime. The Morgan estate, an imposing mansion on the Upper East Side, a prestigious Manhattan neighborhood, seemed as fragile as its owner. Richard Morgan, at 52, watched the city from the large window of his suite, motionless in his custom-made titanium wheelchair. The man who had once commanded one of the largest real estate empires in the United States now depended on others even to turn the wheels that carried him. 5 years had passed since that fateful day at the construction site of the Morgan Sky Tower, which was to be the tallest building in the country. A structure gave way, and what should have been the pinnacle of his career became the end of it. The fall not only broke his spine but also his independence. The diagnosis was devastating: permanent paraplegia with no chance of recovery. "Richard, time for your medication." Veronica Shaw entered the room with a meticulously arranged tray. At 45, she maintained the elegance and firmness that had made her one of the most respected executives in the New York real estate market. Richard's former partner, she was now his fiancée and official caregiver. "Thank you, darling." Richard accepted the glass filled with a thick, greenish liquid. "What is this today?" "It tastes different. It's the new Swiss formula Dr. Matthews recommended. It will help with the circulation in your legs." Veronica adjusted the blanket over Richard's inert legs. "You need to drink all of it." From the slightly ajar door, Louisa Miller, the housekeeper's daughter, observed the scene with discreet attention. At 24, she was in her final year of economics at Columbia University on a full scholarship. She had grown up in this house where her mother, Mrs. Carroll, had worked for 2 decades. She knew Richard from before the accident, when he was still the business titan who appeared on the covers of Forbes. "Miss Shaw, may I serve lunch?" Louisa asked as she entered, noticing how Richard seemed increasingly lethargic after taking his medicine. "In a little while, Mr. Morgan needs to rest a bit after his medication." Veronica dismissed the young woman with a gesture. "And remind your mother that today is the day to change all the bed linens." Louisa nodded and left, but not before noticing something strange. Veronica was carefully putting a vial into her designer handbag, a vial that didn't look like it came from any pharmacy or hospital. In the kitchen, Mrs. Carroll was preparing a vegetable soup, strictly following the nutritional instructions left by Veronica. "Mom, don't you think it's strange how Mr. Morgan gets after taking those medicines from Miss Shaw?" Louisa asked in a low voice while cutting bread for lunch. "Honey, don't get involved in that. Our job is to take care of the house, not to question medical treatments." Mrs. Carroll was a practical woman with calloused hands and a generous heart. "The poor man suffered so much from the accident. It's natural he needs strong medicine. But he was so different before. Remember how he used to joke with me when I was a child? Always cheerful, full of energy. Now he seems faded. Life fades a lot of people, darling, especially after losing everything he lost." Mrs. Carroll sighed, remembering the Richard from before. The man who built dreams in concrete and glass, who transformed abandoned lots into luxury condominiums, who revolutionized the New York City skyline. Lunch proceeded as it had every day for the past 5 years. Veronica fed Richard with studied patience while discussing the few business matters still under her command. She now managed everything, as his attorney with full power of attorney. "I signed the sales contract for the land in the Hamptons today," she commented between spoonfuls of soup she offered to Richard. "It was for less than we expected, but we need the capital to cover your medical expenses for the next 6 months. Richard just nodded. His eyes, once sharp analyzers of opportunities, now seemed clouded, distant. Occasionally his gaze met Louisa's, who served the table with the discretion of someone who grew up behind the scenes of others' wealth. After lunch, while Louisa was clearing the dishes, Veronica received a call that made her quickly step out into the conservatory. The young woman noticed the sudden change in her employer's tone, from sweet and controlled to harsh and incisive. Without thinking much, she quietly approached the glass door. "No, it's not that simple," Veronica was saying with restrained irritation. He still has moments of lucidity. Yes, I'm increasing it gradually. No, nobody suspects anything. They all think it's part of the treatment. Louisa froze, the tray of dishes still in her hands. Something about that conversation sent a chill down her spine. The will is ready, but I need him to sign it in a moment of clarity, without raising suspicion. Yes, as his fiancé, I'm entitled to everything, but I want guarantees. Don't worry, I'll have total control soon. When Veronica hung up and turned around, she nearly collided with Louisa, who pretended to have just arrived. What are you doing here? Her tone was icy. I'm sorry, ma'am. I came to ask if Mr. Morgan would like coffee after lunch as usual. Veronica studied the young woman's face for a few seconds. No, today he needs to rest more. The doctor recommended it. Her voice softened artificially. By the way, Louisa, I appreciate your dedication, but remember, I am the one who takes care of Richard's health. Only I know what he needs. That afternoon, while tidying the office Richard now rarely used, Louisa found old documents, architectural plans, contracts, articles about the Morgan Empire. In a photo from the inauguration of a development, Richard was smiling next to Veronica. Something in her eyes even back then seemed calculating. At dinner, Richard was visibly more worn out. He could barely keep his eyes open as Veronica fed him small portions of a special nutritional paste. Is it normal for him to be like this after the medicine? Louisa asked, unable to contain herself. Veronica shot her a sharp look. What did you say? I'm sorry, ma'am. It's just that he seems so absent. The medication for neuropathic pain causes drowsiness. It's perfectly normal. The tone was final, ending any discussion. Later, in the small apartment she shared with her mother at the back of the property, Louisa couldn't sleep. Veronica's words on the phone echoed in her mind. Increasing it gradually, total control, the will. Something terrible was happening in that house. Something silent and poisonous, like the ivy that climbed the mansion's walls, slowly suffocating everything it touched. Mum, Louisa murmured in the darkness of the room, knowing Mrs. Carroll was still awake. Do you think Mr. Morgan is really as sick as he seems? There was a long silence before the reply. I've worked in this house since before you were born, honey. I saw Richard build an empire. I saw him lose the use of his legs. But never in all these years have I seen him lose the spark in his eyes like now. Mrs. Carroll sighed heavily. It's as if something beyond his legs is being paralyzed. That night, Louisa made a decision. She had to find out what was really happening to Richard Morgan. Not just for the man who had always treated her with respect and kindness when she was a child, but because her intuition screamed that something was deeply wrong beneath that roof of marble and crystal. What she didn't know was that her curiosity would lead her to unravel a macabre plan, woven with the same precision with which Richard used to design his skyscrapers, and that perhaps there was still time to save not only a man's life, but also his spirit, so long dormant under layers of suspicious medication and manipulation. If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. 3 days had passed since Louisa overheard Veronica's unsettling phone conversation. During that time, she watched everything with keener eyes, the strict medication schedules, the obsessive care with which Veronica personally prepared all of Richard's meals, the insistence on keeping away the few friends who still tried to visit the former tycoon. That Monday morning, Louisa took advantage of Veronica having a meeting with lawyers downtown to observe Richard's routine more closely. With the excuse of arranging books in the library, she remained in the room adjacent to the master bedroom. Louisa, is that you out there? Richard's voice sounded stronger than usual, surprising the young woman. Yes, Mr. Morgan. I'm organizing the library. She appeared at the door, holding some books. Come here for a moment, he gestured weakly. Without his morning medication, Richard seemed more present, more connected to his surroundings. You're always around, but we rarely talk. Louisa approached cautiously. Miss Shaw prefers that we don't bother you. Miss Shaw isn't here right now. A flash of the old Richard, determined and direct, appeared in his eyes. How is college going? Economics at Columbia, right? Your mother always speaks of it with pride. I'm graduating this year. Louisa smiled, surprised that he remembered. I'm developing my thesis on a sustainable real estate market. Ironic, isn't it? Studying the market that was my whole life. He looked out the window at the skyline of buildings he had helped to build. You know, Louisa, sometimes I feel like I'm sinking in quicksand. I wake up with clear thoughts, but they soon fade away with the medicine. Louisa hesitated for a moment, then gathered her courage. Mr. Morgan, do you completely trust your current treatment? Richard stared at her, surprised by the boldness of the question. Why do you ask? It's just, she bit her lip, calculating the risks. You seem so different when you're off the medication. More present. A heavy silence settled in the room. Richard seemed to be processing the observation. Veronica dedicates her life to me, he finally answered, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. Without her, I'd be... Of course, she's very dedicated, Louisa hurried to agree. I just thought... The sound of the front door interrupted their conversation. Veronica had returned earlier than expected. We'll continue this later, Richard murmured, suddenly alert. I appreciate your concern, Louisa. The young woman left quickly, crossing paths with Veronica in the hallway. What were you doing in Richard's room? Veronica's tone was accusatory. He called me in to ask about my studies, Louisa replied with studied calm. I was in the library. Veronica narrowed her eyes. Richard needs peace and quiet, not distractions. Next time, inform me before you enter his room. As Veronica headed to the master bedroom, Louisa realized she needed to be more cautious. The woman was cunning and controlling. Any suspicion could complicate the situation. The next day, while helping her mother with dinner, Louisa decided to share her concerns. Mom, I think there's something wrong with the medicine Miss Shaw gives Mr. Morgan. Mrs. Carroll stopped chopping vegetables and looked worriedly at her daughter. What do you mean? Yesterday when she wasn't here, I talked with him for a bit. He seemed like a different person, more lucid, more present. It's as if the medicine is keeping him sedated on purpose. Be careful what you're implying, girl. Mrs. Carroll lowered her voice. Veronica has documents, medical authorization for everything she does. Or maybe she has doctors in her pocket. Louisa moved closer, speaking almost in whispers. Remember that phone call I overheard? About the will, about having total control? What if she's manipulating his health to get his fortune? Mrs. Carroll turned pale. In her 20 years working for Richard Morgan, she had developed a genuine affection for her employer. What can we do? We're just employees. We can observe, document, try to understand what's in the medicine. Louisa felt a growing determination, and maybe interfere discreetly. The following morning, Louisa got up before dawn. She knew Veronica prepared Richard's first dose of medication at 6 o'clock, in the small lab she had set up in one of the mansion's suites. With silent steps, she approached the slightly ajar door. Inside the room, Veronica was handling vials and measures with the precision of a pharmacist. Louisa could make out some labels, legitimate drugs for pain and muscle control, but also unmarked vials. Veronica mixed everything in a small blender, added a whitish powder from an unlabeled jar, and transferred it to a golden thermos, reserved exclusively for Richard's medicinal drinks. When Veronica left to take a call, Louisa seized the moment. She quickly entered the lab and photographed the vials with her phone. She particularly noticed one with a German label, partially scraped off. She could only make out a few words, muscle relaxans and hochdosiert. Her basic German allowed her to understand high-dose muscle relaxant. She was almost caught when Veronica returned abruptly. She hid in the adjacent walk-in closet, her heart pounding. Through the crack in the door, she saw the woman add more of the white powder to the mixture, muttering, "A little stronger today. We need him to sign those developer documents." That afternoon, Louisa discreetly researched potent muscle relaxants on the library computer. What she discovered alarmed her. In high doses, some of these drugs could not only relax muscles, but also induce a state of semi-consciousness, mental confusion, and with prolonged use, they even simulate symptoms of neurological degeneration. My God, she murmured to herself, she's not just controlling him, she's deliberately worsening his condition. The opportunity to act came 2 days later. Veronica had to leave for a meeting with investors and left the golden thermos with Richard's morning medication. She instructed Mrs. Carroll to serve it at 9 o'clock, without fail. Mom, we can't give this to him. Louisa confronted Mrs. Carroll as soon as Veronica left. I'm almost certain there's something harmful in there. And what do you suggest we do? If he doesn't get the medication and improves, Veronica will know we interfered. Louisa thought quickly. I'll replace it with a diluted version. Not so different that she'll notice, but enough for him to be less sedated. With her mother's reluctant help, Louisa prepared a similar mixture, using only the legitimate pain medications in smaller doses. Completely omitting the mysterious white powder, she transferred it to an identical thermos, carefully swapping them. At 9 o'clock, Mrs. Carroll served the modified drink to Richard. Louisa watched discreetly from the doorway, anxious and apprehensive. Richard drank the mixture as he always did, without suspecting the switch. Initially, there was no perceptible difference. But after about an hour, the time when he would normally be lethargic and confused, he remained alert. His eyes seemed clearer, more focused. "Carol," he called out when the housekeeper came to clear the breakfast tray, "I'm feeling different today, more awake." "It must be a good day, sir," Mrs. Carroll replied, avoiding his gaze. At noon, when he would normally be napping without energy, Richard asked to be taken to the balcony. For the first time in months, he expressed an interest in seeing the garden, in feeling the sun. He even asked for a newspaper to read, a habit he had gradually abandoned in recent years. Louisa watched the transformation with a mix of hope and fear. On one hand, her suspicion that Veronica was manipulating Richard's condition was confirmed. On the other, she feared the consequences when the woman returned and noticed the change. When Veronica arrived in the late afternoon and found Richard on the balcony, intently reading the financial section of the newspaper, her face hardened for a moment. "How are you feeling, darling?" she asked with false sweetness. "Surprisingly well today," he replied, looking her directly in the eyes. "Maybe your new Swiss formula is finally taking effect." Veronica cast a suspicious glance at Mrs. Carroll, who maintained a neutral expression. "That's good. But you shouldn't overexert yourself. Remember what the doctor said about mental excitement and its effects on your blood pressure." That night, as Veronica prepared Richard's nightly cocktail, Louisa secretly watched her. The woman added double the usual amount of the white powder, muttering irritably about drug tolerance and controlling lucid spikes. At that moment, Louisa was certain. Veronica's plan wasn't just to control Richard's fortune, it was to systematically erase his consciousness, keeping him in a vegetative state until she could assume total control, probably staging an accident when everything was properly documented. The following week, Louisa and Mrs. Carroll established a risky pattern. They gradually diluted the doses prepared by Veronica, replacing part of the contents with harmless versions. Richard's transformation, though subtle enough not to arouse immediate suspicion, was remarkable to anyone watching him closely. "I don't think I need the blanket today," Richard said on a particularly warm February afternoon as he watched the garden from the balcony. "I'm feeling more sensation in my legs." Louisa, who was arranging the nearby cushions, contained her emotion upon hearing that. It was the first time in years Richard had mentioned any sensation below his waist. "Are you sure, sir?" she asked cautiously. "Yes?" He frowned as if trying to decipher his own body. "It's strange, like occasional tingling. I thought it was impossible considering my diagnosis." The diagnosis? Louisa was beginning to question even that. For the past few nights, she had been obsessively researching spinal cord injuries and their treatments. She discovered that many patients with incomplete paraplegia could regain sensation and even some movement with proper therapy, had Richard received the right treatment from the beginning. The opportunity to investigate more deeply arose when Veronica had to travel to Washington, D.C., to resolve bureaucratic issues related to one of Richard's old developments. She would be gone for 2 full days, enough time for a small intervention. "Mr. Morgan, I brought your breakfast." Louisa entered the master bedroom the morning after Veronica's departure, carrying a tray where, for the first time in years, there was no medicinal drink. "Where's my medicine?" he asked automatically. Miss Shaw left instructions to temporarily reduce the medication. The lie flowed easily, justified by the greater good. "She said it would be good for your system to rest for a day." Richard seemed momentarily confused, but accepted the explanation. He ate with more appetite than usual, and by late morning asked for something that surprised Louisa. "Could you bring me my laptop? I'd like to check some emails." Louisa hesitated for a second. She knew Veronica kept Richard away from any contact with the outside world, especially business. Of course, sir. She brought the device she found stored in the library, dusty from disuse. To her surprise, Richard remembered all his passwords and navigated through files and emails with familiarity. His body might be debilitated, but his mind, free from the sedatives, proved to be as sharp as ever. He spent hours engrossed in documents, occasionally frowning or making totes. "Louisa," he called out in the late afternoon, "did you know that Veronica sold 3 of my most valuable properties for well below market value in the last year?" The young woman swallowed hard. "I didn't know the details, sir. She mentioned they were necessary sales to cover medical expenses." Medical expenses of nearly $20 million. Richard raised an eyebrow, the old shrewd businessman emerging from beneath the surface of the frail man. Either she's being swindled by the service providers, or he didn't complete the sentence, but the look he gave Louisa contained a silent question, as if he were finally beginning to see something that had been there all along. That evening, Louisa made a risky decision. While serving dinner, she sat in the chair opposite Richard, something she would never do in Veronica's presence. "Mr. Morgan, may I ask you a personal question?" He nodded, curious about the unusual approach. "Have you ever questioned your medical diagnosis? Have you ever sought a second opinion on your condition?" Richard slowly put down his fork. "Veronica consulted the best specialists when I had the accident. They were all unanimous, complete injury, no chance of recovery. And after that, any regular follow-ups with different neurologists. Veronica preferred to centralize everything with Dr. Matthews. She said it was better to have one professional who knew my case inside and out." He paused. "Why these questions, Louisa?" The young woman took a deep breath. It was the moment of truth. "Mr. Morgan, I've been watching you for years. I grew up in this house, remember? I saw what you were like before and what you became after." She hesitated, then continued, "In the last few days, when we reduced your medication without you realizing, you've become more yourself again." Richard's eyes widened. "What do you mean you reduced it? You've been altering my medication." "Yes," Louisa admitted, fearing his reaction. "And we've seen significant changes. You mentioned sensation in your legs. You're more alert, more focused." A tense silence filled the room. Richard seemed to be processing the information, decades of business instinct clashing with the trust he had placed in his caregiver. "Are you implying that Veronica would be keeping me more debilitated than I really am?" "I'm not just implying," Louisa replied, deciding to risk everything. "I have proof. I photographed the components she adds to your drinks. I researched them. They are muscle relaxants in doses far above the recommended amount, combined with powerful sedatives." She showed him the photos on her phone, including the vial with the partially scraped German label. She also showed him her research on the effects of those substances. "Why would she do this?" Richard's voice trembled slightly. "I overheard a phone conversation of hers," Louisa confessed. "She was talking about having total control, about the will, about increasing the doses gradually." Richard remained silent for long minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of pain and determination. "I need more proof before I confront her." "What if we run a test? Continue without her medication for another day. See how you feel. Then we can find an independent doctor secretly." The next morning, Richard woke with a mental clarity he hadn't experienced in years. He asked to be helped to the balcony and for the first time expressed a desire to try some simple exercises. "Mrs. Carroll, could you help me move my legs?" he asked when the housekeeper came to check on him. "Just to bend the knees a little, like in the old days." Carefully, Carroll helped him perform passive movements on his legs. To the astonishment of both, as he tried to bend his right knee, there was a slight muscular resistance, tiny, almost imperceptible, but definitely present. "My goodness," Mrs. Carroll murmured, tears in her eyes. "Mr. Morgan, you're not imagining it," he said, equally moved. "I felt it. It was like trying to move something buried under tons of sand, but I felt it. That small discovery changed everything." Richard, re-energized by the possibility that his condition was not as irreversible as he had been led to believe, became an active participant in the investigation. "Louisa," he called later, "in the office, I need you to do something for me." Find my original medical documents. They should be in the safe in my room or in the office files. While Louisa searched for the documents, Richard made discreet calls, using an old cell phone he had found in a desk drawer, a device Veronica probably didn't know existed. "Dr. Roberts, this is Richard Morgan. Yes, it's been a long time. No, I'm not doing as well as they say. In fact, I need your help urgently. Could you come to my house tomorrow morning before 9? It's a delicate matter, medical. Yes, completely confidential." When Louisa returned with a folder of medical documents, Richard had already organized a plan. "I found the original reports from the accident," she said, placing the papers on the desk. Richard examined them carefully, his expression gradually changing from concentration to outrage. "This doesn't add up," he muttered, comparing documents. "The initial report from the neurosurgeon mentions an incomplete lesion with possibility of partial long-term recovery. But the report Veronica always showed me said complete lesion, irreversible prognosis." Louisa felt a shiver run down her spine. "She altered your medical documents? Or persuaded someone to alter them?" Richard took a deep breath, trying to control his rising anger. "Tomorrow morning, Dr. Roberts, my trusted doctor from before the accident, is coming to examine me. We need to keep this an absolute secret. Veronica only returns in the afternoon." That night, while Richard slept an unmedicated sleep for the first time in years, having vivid dreams instead of the usual induced emptiness, Louisa and Mrs. Carroll talked in low voices in their apartment out back. "What if we're wrong, honey? What if she finds out and fires us? Where will we go? Mom, we've seen enough to be sure. And even if we lost our jobs, how could we live knowing what we know and having done nothing?" Louisa held her mother's hands firmly. "Besides, Mr. Morgan deserves a real chance." The next morning, Dr. Roberts, a gentleman with grey hair and a stern expression, arrived promptly at 8 o'clock. Louisa greeted him discreetly at the service entrance and led him to the master bedroom. The examination lasted nearly 2 hours. The doctor tested reflexes, sensation, muscle tone, and performed several other procedures, occasionally muttering to himself or taking notes. "Richard," he said finally, removing his stethoscope, "based on what I see today and comparing it with your original exams, which I fortunately kept in my personal files, I can state with certainty your injury was always incomplete. There are clear signs that some neural pathways remained intact. So, there's a possibility of recovery." Richard's voice could barely hide his hope. "With the right treatment, intensive physical therapy, and possibly some surgical interventions to release secondary compressions, yes, there's a real chance of recovering some movement and much more sensation." The doctor paused, his expression turning grave. "But I must warn you, the muscle relaxants and sedatives I found in your system, at the dosage I detected, not only prevented any progress, but likely masked signs of natural recovery that could have occurred over the past few years." Richard and Louisa exchanged glances. The confirmation of their suspicions was both validating and devastating. "I need samples of what you've been receiving," the doctor continued, "and authorization to conduct full toxicological screenings. What I see here is at the very least severe medical negligence. In the worst-case scenario—" He didn't complete the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. The three in the room perfectly understood the gravity of the situation. "Dr. Roberts," Richard said with a determination reminiscent of his glory years in business, "I want you to document everything, every detail, and I want total secrecy until I decide how to proceed." When the doctor left, taking samples of the mixtures prepared by Veronica, Richard called Louisa over to his wheelchair. "I need you to help me with one more thing," he said, with an intensity the young woman had never seen since the accident. "Veronica comes back today. We need to resume the normal routine so she doesn't suspect anything body yet, but I want you to continue observing and documenting everything." "Are you going to confront her?" "Not immediately." A determined smile appeared on his lips. "First, we're going to turn the tables in our favor. She wants control. Let's see who really has control when the game is played fair." When Veronica returned from D.C., she found everything seemingly as she had left it. Richard was in his chair, with the same slightly dazed expression, receiving his medication with his usual docility. But beneath that carefully maintained facade, a silent revolution was underway. "How was your trip, darling?" Richard asked in a deliberately slurred voice, as she arranged the medicine vials on the nightstand. Productive. I managed to resolve that issue with the department. Veronica leaned in to kiss his forehead. Did you miss me? Always. He smiled weakly while his eyes, now far more observant than she imagined, captured her every suspicious move. In the following weeks, Richard, Louisa, and Mrs. Carroll executed a meticulous plan. Outwardly, everything followed the same ritual. Veronica prepared the medicinal drinks. Richard took them obediently. But as soon as she left the room, Louisa would replace the contents of the cup with a harmless mixture, and Richard would discreetly expel what he had already put in his mouth, using a small container hidden under the blanket covering his legs. The collected samples were regularly sent to Dr. Roberts, who conducted detailed analyses in a discreet laboratory. The doctor also visited Richard secretly during Veronica's absences, bringing portable equipment for physical therapy and neurological monitoring. Your recovery of mental clarity is impressive, commented Dr. Roberts during one of these clandestine visits, 3 weeks after the plan began. And the neurological signs in your legs are becoming more and more evident. The reflexes are returning, especially on the right side. Richard nodded, focused on the small movements he was trying to make with his right foot, tiny, almost imperceptible, but real. How long do you think it will take for me to get some functional movement? It's hard to say. It's been 5 years of muscle atrophy and neurological suppression. But with the intensive physical therapy we're doing in her absence, the doctor gestured towards Veronica, who had left for a business lunch. I can say I'm optimistic. Your original injury was much less severe than you were led to believe. Richard's plan was not limited to physical recovery. In the hours he was alone with Louisa, he meticulously reviewed business documents, gradually discovering the extent of Veronica's financial manipulation. She sold properties valued at over 100 million for less than half their worth, he commented, examining contracts on the laptop. And the money certainly didn't go to my medical expenses. Where did it go then? Asked Louisa, who now acted as his informal assistant in the investigations. To offshore accounts in her name and those of third parties. She built a complex network of diversions. Richard smiled ironically. Ironic, isn't it? She was my best financial executive. I taught her all the legal tricks for tax optimization. Apparently, she learned some illegal ones on her own. The forced proximity during these secret investigations brought Richard and Louisa closer in an unexpected way. He admired the young woman's intelligence and courage. She respected his resilience and sharp mind, even after years of induced suffering. Why did you risk so much for me? He asked one afternoon as they worked on the documents. You could have lost your job or worse. Louisa paused, considering the question. At first it was about the injustice. I grew up watching you build things, create opportunities for people, including my family. To see someone like Miss Shaw destroy that out of greed, she hesitated. Then it became personal. Every little improvement of yours, every moment of recovered lucidity, felt like a victory against something deeply wrong. Richard watched her with an intensity he hadn't shown for anything or anyone in a long time. Thank you, he said simply, covering her hand with his for a brief moment. As the weeks passed, it became increasingly difficult to maintain the charade in front of Veronica. Richard was recovering not only mental clarity and small movements, but also his assertive personality. At times he almost let slip comments that were too lucid or demonstrations of strength that were incompatible with his supposed state. The situation reached a critical point when Veronica announced she had scheduled a visit from a notary. We need to update your will. Darling, she said during dinner, considering your health and the current business circumstances, the lawyers recommend some changes. What kind of changes? Richard asked, almost forgetting to maintain the vague, confused tone he had adopted to deceive her. Nothing significant, Veronica replied quickly. Just technical details to protect your assets from potential future disputes. Richard exchanged a quick glance with Louisa, who was serving dessert. They both knew the critical moment had arrived. I want to read the document first, he said, surprising Veronica. I may not understand everything like I used to, but I can still read. Of course, darling. But they are complex legal terms. It might be better to trust the experts. Still, I want to read it. There was a firmness in his voice that he hadn't shown in front of her for a long time. Veronica studied him for a moment, a wrinkle of concern forming on her forehead. "You seem different lately, Richard. More present." "It's just your imagination," Louisa intervened quickly. "Mr. Morgan just had a good week, right, sir?" Richard nodded, trying to look confused again. "I just want to understand what I'm signing. It's the least I can do." The next day, Veronica brought the will for Richard to review. As they suspected, it was a version that practically named her the sole heir to all his assets, using technical terms to mask the total transfer of control. "I'm not signing this," Richard said after a careful reading. "What?" Veronica couldn't hide her irritation. "Richard, you're not in a condition to analyze complex legal issues. This is for your own good. Perhaps I should consult another lawyer, an independent one." Veronica's face hardened momentarily, but she quickly regained her composure. "If that makes you more comfortable, of course. But I fully trust our current firm. Trust is good. Verification is better." Richard quoted one of his old business mantras, not realizing it was a phrase he hadn't used since before the accident. Veronica's eyes narrowed. "You are different. What happened?" "Nothing happened. I'm just having a moment of clarity." That night, Louisa overheard a heated conversation in the master bedroom. She quietly approached the slightly ajar door. "The medication isn't working as it should," Veronica was saying on the phone, clearly agitated. "He's questioning decisions, asking to read documents. Yes, I've increased the dose, but it seems he's developed a tolerance." There was a pause as she listened to the response. "No, I can't just double the dosage. That would raise suspicion if something happens. We need another approach. The original plan is still on. We just need to accelerate the process." Louisa felt a chill. The process could only mean one thing. Veronica was planning to end the situation definitively. Immediately after Veronica hung up, Louisa ran to inform Richard of what she had heard. "She's getting desperate," he concluded thoughtfully. "That makes her more dangerous, but also more prone to making mistakes." "What are we going to do?" Louisa asked, genuinely concerned. "Maybe we should call the police." "Not yet. We need concrete evidence, not just suspicions." Richard took a deep breath, his face hardening with determination. "It's time to change tactics. We can no longer just react. We need to provoke a controlled confrontation." The next day, during breakfast, Richard refused to take his medication. "I haven't been feeling well with these medicines lately," he said, pushing the cup away. "I want to see another doctor." "That's absurd," Veronica reacted, trying to stay calm. "Dr. Matthews has been handling your case for years. He knows your specific needs. Even so, I want a second opinion. In fact," he paused dramatically, "I want Louisa and Mrs. Carroll to watch the preparation of my medication from now on." Veronica's face turned pale. "Why? Don't you trust me?" "I do, but 4 eyes are better than 2. And since you insist that this whole medication regimen is vital for my health, I see no problem in making the process more transparent." A tense silence settled between them. Veronica seemed to be weighing her options, while Richard watched her with a gaze far more penetrating than she had been accustomed to seeing in recent years. "Fine," she said finally, a forced smile on her face. "I have nothing to hide. Louisa can watch if it makes you more comfortable." Richard's plan worked better than expected. The next morning, as Veronica prepared the medication under Louisa's watchful eye, she made several revealing mistakes. She presented different versions of vials that supposedly contained the same drugs, avoided showing labels, and even lied about the origin of certain components. "You said this white powder is the Swiss vitamin supplement," Louisa observed innocently. "But the label is in German, not French or Italian." "Swiss pharmacies often use multilingual labels," Veronica replied quickly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to concentrate on the correct dosages." When Louisa left, she took with her discreet photographic evidence of everything she had observed. Richard received the information with a mixture of pain and restrained anger. "She was once my most trusted partner," he murmured, looking at the photos on Louisa's phone. "We built an empire together. How could she—" "Some people change when power and money are involved," Louisa replied softly. "Others just reveal who they always were." That afternoon, Richard took the next risky step. He asked to speak directly with his doctor, without Veronica's intermediation. "I want to talk to Dr. Matthews," he announced during lunch. "Alone." "He's very busy," Veronica tried. But I can schedule it for next week. No, today. By phone, if necessary. Richard's voice brooked no argument. Cornered, Veronica finally gave in, handing him the phone with evident reluctance. To her surprise, Richard didn't call Dr. Matthews, but Dr. Roberts, putting the call on speakerphone. Dr. Roberts, this is Richard Morgan. I'd like to confirm. Are the results of my toxicology tests ready yet? Yes, Richard. The toxicology tests are ready, replied Dr. Roberts's grave voice over the speakerphone, and they confirm our suspicions. Alarming levels of benzodiazepines and controlled-use muscle relaxants. Concentrations we would never prescribe for any patient. Veronica's face transformed into a mask of shock and rage. Who is this? What tests are these? Her voice rose as she tried to grab the phone. Richard held the phone firmly, staring directly at her. Here's my trusted doctor, the one who treated me before the accident. The one you systematically pushed away over the last 5 years. You have no authority to run tests without my knowledge. I am your medical power of attorney. Your treatment is my responsibility. Veronica seemed to waver between indignation and panic. Dr. Roberts, Richard continued, ignoring her protests, could you explain what these drugs cause when administered continuously in the doses found? They cause deep sedation, mental confusion, extreme muscle weakness, and can mask signs of neurological recovery, the doctor explained calmly. In the long term, they can cause severe dependency and even permanent damage to the central nervous system. This is absurd. Veronica finally managed to snatch the phone from Richard. I don't know who you are or what kind of quackery you're practicing, but Richard's treatment is supervised by the best specialists in the country. Like Dr. Matthews? Dr. Roberts' voice remained calm, professional. Curious! I consulted the state medical board yesterday. Dr. Matthews had his license suspended 2 years ago for ethical misconduct in another case. He has been barred from practicing medicine ever since. There was a moment of absolute silence in the room. Richard and Louisa, who was watching everything from the doorway, exchanged significant glances. The castle of lies was beginning to crumble. This is a conspiracy, Veronica muttered, abruptly hanging up the phone. Her gaze shifted between Richard and Louisa, like a cornered animal. You two planned this. You're trying to push me out after everything I've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Veronica? Richard asked, his voice filled with a dangerous calm. Keep me sedated for 5 years. Make me believe my condition was irreversible. Siphon millions from my businesses, while I was chemically incapacitated to question anything. I saved your empire after the accident, she screamed, abandoning any pretense of care. While you were in that hospital bed, I was the one who stopped everything from falling apart. I deserve every penny, and for that you decided to keep me like a vegetable for the rest of my life? Richard's voice rose for the first time. Or perhaps your plan was more definitive. Maybe that accident you mentioned on the phone weeks ago? Veronica turned pale. What are you talking about? I heard your conversation, Louisa intervened, stepping forward. About accelerating the process, about total control. I recorded everything. She held up her phone, showing the recording app. You can't do that. It's illegal. Veronica tried to grab Louisa's phone. So is systematically poisoning a person, the young woman retorted, stepping back. Richard turned his wheelchair, positioning himself between the two women. It's over, Veronica. I've already contacted my lawyers. Mr. Andrew Taylor is on his way with the necessary documents. And believe me, he never stopped being my lawyer, despite what you may have led me to believe. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Carroll, who had been watching the scene from the kitchen door, went to answer it. She returned accompanied by a tall man in an impeccable suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Mr. Morgan, the lawyer greeted formally. As requested, I have here the documents for the immediate revocation of all of Mrs. Shaw's powers of attorney, as well as notification of an investigation for embezzlement and possible criminal charges for administering controlled substances without a valid medical prescription. Veronica looked trapped. Her gaze scanned the room, calculating possible escapes. For a moment, her eyes landed on the handbag on the sofa, where Richard knew she always kept a vial of her special medicines. Don't even think about it, he warned, sensing her intention. The evidence is already in several safe places. including the confession you just made recorded by Louisa. This is a setup. Veronica tried one last desperate gambit. He's not in a mental state to make legal decisions. He's being manipulated by this little maid with whom he has obviously developed some kind of sick fixation. The lawyer remained impassive. Dr. Roberts has already submitted a report attesting to Mr. Morgan's full mental capacity, once free of the improper medication. Furthermore, the FBI seized records of suspicious bank transfers to overseas accounts earlier today. Your situation is extremely delicate, Mrs. Shaw. Veronica's legs gave way and she sank onto the sofa. For the first time since they had known her, she looked completely defeated. "What do you want, Richard?" she finally asked, her voice a whisper. "Money, I can return it all. We can reach an agreement." "I want my life back," he replied simply, "and I want you to sign a detailed confession of everything you did. In return, I might consider not pressing criminal charges." The lawyer opened his briefcase, taking out a meticulously prepared document. "It's all here. A full confession, waiver of any rights to Mr. Morgan's assets, and an agreement to leave the country in 48 hours with no possibility of return." Veronica looked at the paper, then at Richard. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." Richard's gaze was relentless. "Sign it, Veronica. It's your only dignified way out." For long minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, with trembling hands, Veronica took the pen offered by the lawyer and signed the document. "I hope you'll be very happy together," she said with bitterness, looking from Richard to Louisa. "The ambitious maid's daughter finally pulled off the gold-digging scheme I was planning." "The difference," Louisa replied calmly, "is that I never wanted his money. I just wanted him to have a fair chance to recover." After Veronica's departure, escorted by a private security guard the lawyer had brought, a heavy silence settled over the mansion. Years of manipulation and lies had come to an end, but the road ahead still seemed uncertain. "What now?" Louisa asked, helping Richard move to the balcony, his favorite spot in the house. "Now we start over," he replied, watching the sunset over New York. "The hardest part, actually. I have a body to rebuild, businesses to recover, and a whole life to rediscover." The following days were ones of intense transformation. With Veronica gone, the mansion seemed to breathe again. The windows stayed open, music played in the hallways once more, and a medical team specializing in neurological rehabilitation set up in one of the wings. Dr. Roberts, now officially the doctor in charge of the case, coordinated an intensive treatment that included advanced physical therapy, electrical stimulation, and a battery of legitimate drugs to promote nerve regeneration. "It's impressive how your body is responding," he commented during an evaluation session 2 weeks after Veronica's departure. "The nerve endings that remained intact are taking over the functions of the damaged ones. It's a phenomenon called neuroplasticity." Richard nodded, focused on the small movements he could now consciously make with his right foot. It wasn't much, just controlled muscle contractions, but it represented a universe of possibilities that had been denied to him for years. "How long until I can—" He hesitated, afraid to get his hopes up too high. "Stand up? Walk?" The doctor smiled gently. "Impossible to predict with certainty, but with the dedication you're showing and the quality of your rehabilitation team, I'd say we could see significant progress in 6 months to a year." 1 year. After 5 years of believing he would never leave his wheelchair, the prospect of a year seemed almost miraculous. While his physical recovery progressed slowly, Richard's financial and business recovery moved with surprising speed. A full audit revealed the extent of Veronica's embezzlement, nearly $200 million in undervalued sales, detrimental contracts, and illegal transfers. "We'll be able to recover about 60%, the lawyer explained during a meeting in the newly reactivated office. "The rest is in jurisdictions that make tracing difficult or has been converted into hard-to-recover assets." 60% is more than enough to start over, Richard replied, now much more involved in his business decisions. "The important thing is that we have control again." Control. The word had a completely new meaning for him now. Amidst the doctors, therapists, lawyers, and financial consultants who now constantly circulated through the mansion, Louisa remained discreetly present. Although Richard had offered to officially hire her as his personal assistant, She preferred to maintain her original role, finishing her degree in economics while informally assisting with household matters. "Why didn't you accept the position?" Mrs. Carroll asked her one evening as they prepared dinner together. "It would be a huge leap for your career. Because I don't want people to think I did all this for personal gain." Louisa distractedly stirred a sauce on the stove. "And because our dynamic works this way as we are now. If I become an official employee, something would change." Mrs. Carroll watched her daughter with shrewd eyes. "Something has already changed, honey. For both of you." Louisa didn't reply, but the slight blush on her cheek said everything her mother needed to know. As the weeks turned into months, the relationship between Richard and Louisa evolved almost imperceptibly. He increasingly sought her opinion on important decisions. She found small ways to be part of his routine that went beyond practical duties. One evening, 4 months after the confrontation with Veronica, Richard asked Louisa to accompany him to the mansion's terrace. It was a place rarely visited since the accident, accessible only by a specific elevator. "I have a surprise," he said when they reached the spacious area, which offered a view of the entire illuminated city. "What is it?" Louisa asked, curious about the mysterious smile he wore. Richard maneuvered his wheelchair to a metal structure installed in the center of the terrace, parallel support bars, like those used in physical therapy but sturdier. "Dr. Roberts doesn't know about this," he confessed, positioning the chair between the bars. "I've been practicing alone when everyone is asleep. I wanted you to be the first to see." Louisa watched, her heart pounding, as Richard locked the wheels of his chair and, with a visible effort, placed his hands on the parallel bars. His arms, now noticeably stronger after months of intensive physical therapy, tensed. "Richard, are you sure?" "The doctor said it's still too early to—" "I'm ready," he interrupted, determination evident in every line of his face. "Trust me." With a grunt of effort, Richard pushed himself up. For a moment it seemed he would fail, but then, in a slow, trembling motion, he rose from the chair. His legs shook violently, especially the left one, but he managed to stand upright, supported mainly by the bars and his arms, but also partially by his own legs. "Oh my God," Louisa whispered, involuntary tears welling up in her eyes. Richard smiled, his face gleaming with sweat from the effort. "It's not exactly walking yet, but it's incredible." Louisa approached, instinctively ready to support him if needed. "How long have you been practicing this?" 3 weeks. He slowly sat back down, the effort evident in his expression. "I started by being able to stand for just 5 seconds. Now I can manage almost a minute." Louisa was amazed. She was well aware of the medical prognosis, slow recovery, millimeter-sized progress over many months. What Richard was demonstrating surpassed all expectations. "Why didn't you tell the doctors?" "Because I wanted to be sure first. And because—" he hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. "I wanted you to be the first to see." In that moment, something shifted between them. What had been furtive glances and accidental touches crystallized into something tangible, impossible to deny or ignore. "Richard, I know it's complicated," he interrupted gently. "Our history, our positions, everything. But in these months, you've become much more than the housekeeper's daughter or the person who saved me. You've become essential." The words hung in the New York night air, laden with meaning and possibilities. Louisa felt her heart race, torn between what she felt and what she feared others would think. "People will talk," she said finally. "They'll say I took advantage of your vulnerability, that I planned everything from the beginning." Richard smiled, reaching out to touch her face. "Let them talk. We both know the truth. And the truth is, you gave me back much more than my physical freedom. You gave me back the ability to trust, to feel, to live fully." That night, under the New York stars, something that had been growing silently for months was officially born. Not a sudden passion or a fairy tale romance, but a deep connection based on trust, respect, and mutual admiration. The next 6 months were a period of intense transformation, both physical and emotional. Dr. Roberts, initially surprised by Richard's unreported progress, adapted the rehabilitation program to capitalize on his unexpected advances. "Your determination is impressive," the doctor commented after a particularly grueling session, where Richard had managed to take his first assisted steps between the parallel bars. But we need to be careful not to push your body's limits. Doctor, pushing limits is what I've done my whole life, Richard replied with a tired smile. I built buildings where they said it was impossible, revitalized areas everyone considered lost. I'm not going to stop now. And he didn't. Each week, small miracles happened in the physical therapy room set up in the mansion. First assisted steps, then a few steps with a walker, eventually short distances with a cane. Parallel to his physical recovery, Richard's businesses were also making a comeback. With the help of old allies and new talent, many recommended by Louisa, who now applied her knowledge of economics to his ventures, the Morgan Empire began to regain its former prestige. The new corporate tower in Midtown will be the symbol of our reconstruction, he announced during an investor meeting, now held in a specially adapted room in the mansion. A fully sustainable project, aligned with the demands of the 21st century. The project, not coincidentally, incorporated many of the concepts Louisa had championed in her graduation thesis. Now not only a graduate, but also a master's student in sustainable economics at Columbia. Their relationship evolved with cautious steps, respecting the boundaries they both considered important. Richard insisted that Louisa maintain her academic and professional independence, refusing to directly fund her studies or interfere in her nascent career. I want you to achieve everything on your own merit, as you always have, he explained when she tried to turn down an international scholarship, fearing leaving him during his recovery. I'm not a charity project you need to supervise forever. It's not out of charity that I want to stay, she had replied, mustering the courage to express feelings that still frightened her with their intensity. It's because I care about you more than I ever imagined possible. On the anniversary of the confrontation with Veronica, Richard organized a small celebration in the mansion's garden. Only truly close people were invited. Dr. Roberts and his wife, the lawyer Andrew Taylor, Mrs. Carroll, a few old friends who had remained loyal even in the tough times, and, of course, Louisa. The surprise of the evening came when, at the moment of celebration, Richard dismissed the wheelchair he still occasionally used and, leaning only on an elegant cane, walked slowly to the center of the garden. A year ago, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I was a man trapped not only physically, but also emotionally. I believed my future had been stolen, that my fate was sealed. He paused, his gaze finding Louisa's among the guests. Today I am here literally on my own 2 feet, rebuilding not just my body but my entire life. And that would not have been possible without the courage and integrity of one special person. A murmur of approval rippled through the guests. Everyone knew the story, or at least the official version they had chosen to share publicly, omitting the sordid details to avoid unnecessary scandal. Louisa, Richard called, extending his hand. Could you come up here, please? With a flushed face and a racing heart, Louisa approached. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, very different from the practical clothes she used to wear during her years working at the mansion. This extraordinary woman, Richard continued, holding her hand, not only saw what no one else did, but had the courage to act when everyone else was paralyzed by fear or convenience. Louisa tried to protest, uncomfortable with the public praise, but Richard gently interrupted her. I know you didn't do anything expecting recognition or rewards. That is precisely your greatest quality, an integrity that transcends self-interest. To the astonishment of everyone, especially Louisa, Richard then lowered himself onto one knee, maintaining his balance with the cane. The effort was visible, but his determination even more so. That is why he continued, taking a small box from his pocket. I want to ask this question not just as a man in love, but as someone who learned the hard way, the value of honesty and true trust. Silent tears streamed down Louisa's face as he opened the box, revealing a ring with a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. Louisa Miller, would you do me the honor of sharing the rest of this journey with me? Of building a future together based not on dependence but on true partnership? For a moment, time seemed to freeze in the garden. Mrs. Carroll covered her mouth with her hands, moved. Dr. Roberts smiled, as if witnessing the natural culmination of a healing process that went far beyond the physical. Yes, Louisa finally answered, her voice almost a whisper. Yes, I want to build that future with you. Applause and congratulations filled the garden as Richard, with some difficulty but immense pride, stood up again, helped by Louisa. Together, as they had been in the most critical moments of his recovery, they were now united for a new beginning. The wedding took place 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony at the beach house Richard owned in Montauk. The location held special significance. It was where, in the early years of his career, he had dreamed of the skyscrapers that would transform the New York City skyline. When it was time to walk down the makeshift aisle by the sea, Richard surprised everyone once again. Dismissing both the wheelchair and the cane, he walked slowly down the path of shells and flowers, supported only by the arm of Dr. Roberts, who had emotionally accepted the invitation to be his best man. "I promised myself," he confided to Louisa later, "that I would walk on my own strength on our wedding day, that I would be a whole man for you." "You have always been a whole man," she replied, moved. "With or without a cane, with or without a wheelchair. What defines you is not how you walk, but who you are." The honeymoon, a quiet month in a rented villa on the Italian coast, was as much a celebration of love as a continuation of the rehabilitation process. Away from the eyes of New York, Richard could practice his steps on deserted beaches, fall and get up without the weight of expectations, rediscovering not only his body, but also his capacity to live fully. When they returned to the United States, a new phase began. The mansion on the Upper East Side, once a scene of manipulation and suffering, was put up for sale. The couple moved into a more modern and accessible apartment in Soho, specially designed to accommodate Richard's needs as he continued his recovery. "I want a home, not a mausoleum of memories," he explained when asked about the decision. "A place where we can build something new, without the ghosts of the past." The money from the sale was partially directed to a foundation created by the couple, the Phoenix Institute, dedicated to the research and treatment of spinal cord injuries, with special attention to patients without financial resources. Many people are trapped in conditions that could be improved or even reversed, simply because they lack access to information or proper treatment, Louisa explained in the frequent lectures she gave as the Foundation's ambassador. "We want to change that." In parallel with the Institute, Richard continued to reinvent his businesses. Morgan Developments, now with a diverse board of directors that included Louisa as the Director of Sustainability, became a pioneer in ecologically responsible and socially inclusive construction. The real estate market doesn't have to be synonymous with speculation and exclusion, he argued in interviews. It can be a vehicle for positive urban transformation. 2 years after their wedding, as the couple dined on the balcony of their apartment, contemplating the city lights they had helped to transform, Louisa shared news that would complete the cycle of renewal. "I'm pregnant," she announced with a radiant smile. "With twins." Richard, who now walked with a cane only on days of greater fatigue, felt his legs weaken with genuine emotion. He approached her, kneeling with a fluidity that would have been unthinkable years before. "You keep giving me the greatest gifts in life," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion, hugging her around the waist and resting his head against her still flat stomach. "We both know that life won't always be easy," Louisa said, stroking his hair, now slightly grey at the temples. "Your recovery has its ups and downs. My career demands dedication. We'll have challenges, but we'll face them together," Richard completed, looking up to meet her eyes. "As we always have since that first day you dared to question my medication." Night was falling over New York City, the same city that had witnessed the rise and fall of Richard Morgan's empire. Now it watched his rebirth, not just as a businessman or as a man able to walk again, but as someone who had discovered the true meaning of building something that lasts. "You know what occurs to me now?" Richard reflected, as they admired the urban horizon dotted with lights together. "For years I built structures of concrete and glass, thinking they were my greatest achievements. But the real construction is this, a life based on truth, trust, and genuine love." Louisa smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "And unlike buildings, this construction has no deadline or final blueprint. It keeps evolving, getting stronger with every challenge, and adapting to every new need," he added with a playful smile, gently placing his hand on her belly. "Like a nursery for two." As the night wore on and the couple remained embraced on the balcony, contemplating the future they were building together. A silent certainty hung between them. Richard Morgan's true empire was not made of buildings or fortunes, but of the courage to start over and the wisdom to value what truly matters. The mansion on the Upper East Side, now occupied by an educational institution, held the shadows of a past that, though painful, had been essential in leading them to where they were. And while those walls kept secrets of manipulation and control, their new home emanated a completely different energy, that of a love that does not imprison, but liberates. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Richard and Louisa has touched your hearts. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other incredible stories that explore the power of overcoming adversity and the truth. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this journey of reconstruction and true love moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Every day we bring unique stories that show there's always a chance to start over, no matter how difficult life may seem. We look forward to seeing you in the comments to hear which moment of this story touched your heart the most.